My husband Connor and I have always loved horror. Movies, haunted houses, true crime podcasts, you name it. But for as long as he's known me, I've had one rule: no clowns and no Ouija boards. Ever. That rule came from something that happened when I was a kid. I never told Connor the full story, only that it ended with me in tears and a priest blessing our house. But apparently, even that wasn't enough to convince him how serious I was. One evening, Connor came home grinning, holding something behind his back. "Guess what I won at work today?" he said. The second I saw it, my blood ran cold. "Connor, no. Get it out of this house." He laughed. "Come on, it's just a board game. You're overreacting." I stood up, my voice shaking. "You know how I feel about that thing. Out. Now." He sighed like a scolded teenager, muttering something under his breath as he took it back to his truck. I tried to brush it off, but a familiar unease crept in. There are some doors you don't reopen, especially the kind you can't close again. The next night, Connor was out with his friends while I stayed home. It was close to midnight when he still hadn't come back. I texted him twice, no reply. I figured he was drunk somewhere, laughing too hard to check his phone. I fell asleep waiting. It was around 3 in the morning when I woke up to the sound of the front door opening. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate ones, coming up the stairs. I sat up in bed, my heart thudding in my chest. I could see the shadow of someone standing in the doorway. Connor. He didn't say a word. He just walked in, crawled into bed, and faced the wall. "Connor?" I whispered. He nodded once, but didn't speak. I waited for him to move, to say something, but he didn't. Within minutes, he was snoring softly. By morning, I convinced myself he'd just been wasted. When I went downstairs, he was in the kitchen, flipping pancakes, like nothing happened. "Morning," he said cheerfully. I gave him a look. "Do you remember coming home last night?" "Barely," he admitted. "We got trashed. Played with that Ouija board for a while. Don't worry. I left it at Mike's place." My stomach twisted. "You used it?" He chuckled. "Yeah. The guys were joking about some ghost called Mr. Pip. Aaron was totally moving the piece to mess with us. The name hit me like a punch. Mr. Pip. That was the same name I heard as a kid, the same voice that used to whisper to me from the shadows of my old bedroom. I didn't tell Connor that. I just smiled weakly and excused myself, trying not to let him see my hands shaking. For the next week, I watched Connor carefully. Nothing seemed off. He went to work, came home, kissed the kids goodnight. Just normal life. But every now and then, I'd catch him, staring. At first, I thought he was lost in thought. Then one night, I saw him standing perfectly still in the bathroom mirror, just looking at himself, no expression, no movement for almost 10 minutes. When I asked what he was doing, he blinked, smiled, and said, "Just zoning out." Something about that smile didn't feel right. The following Monday, I came home from work to find the house quiet. Too quiet. "Hello?" I called. No answer. I found my 2 kids, Alice and Tommy, sitting at the kitchen table, pale and silent. "Hey," I said softly. "What's wrong?" Alice looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "Dad's acting weird. He told us to stay here until he's done." "Done with what?" Neither of them answered. A chill crept down my spine. I told them to stay put and grabbed the baseball bat Tommy had left by the door. As I climbed the stairs, the silence grew heavier, thicker. The air felt charged like the moment before lightning strikes. I reached our bedroom. The door was closed. From inside, I heard humming. It was a soft, sing-song melody, cheerful, childlike. It stopped the moment I turned the doorknob. Inside, Connor stood in front of the mirror. His reflection looked wrong. His face was painted white, black streaks beneath his eyes, and a red grin stretching across his mouth. A cheap clown costume hung from his body, too big for him, like it wasn't meant to fit. For a long moment, I couldn't move. "Connor," I whispered. "What are you doing?" He turned toward me slowly. When he spoke, it wasn't his voice. It was higher, lighter, with a sing-song lilt. "It's been a long time, Annie. Mr. Pip missed you." Every nerve in my body froze. "My name isn't Annie." He giggled softly, head tilting like a broken doll. "Why the long face? Don't you remember our little games?" I stumbled back, knocking into the dresser. The clown in front of me laughed, that same soft laugh from my childhood nightmares. For the first time in years, I felt 8 years old again, standing in that dark bedroom, watching the planchette slide across the board by itself. "Stop it," I whispered. "You're not real. You're not real." "Connor, no." It tilted its head. "If I'm not real, then why are you shaking, Annie?" The sound of my name, that name, coming from his mouth made my stomach turn. I ran downstairs, heart hammering, desperate to find my kids. They were still at the table, staring at the stairs, like they knew something terrible was up there. "Get your shoes," I said, grabbing my keys with trembling hands. "We're leaving." Tommy hesitated. "What about Dad?" I forced a smile I didn't feel. "He'll meet us later." I could hear movement upstairs, the soft thump of footsteps and faint laughter. We made it to the car, and that's when I saw the reflection in the upstairs window. A figure in white makeup, staring down at us, waving. That night, we stayed at my sister's house. I told her Connor had a breakdown, and that was true, just not the whole truth. I didn't sleep. Every creak in the hallway sounded like footsteps. Every reflection caught me off guard. By morning, I decided to go back. I needed answers. The house was silent when I walked in. Connor's clown makeup sat on the vanity, half wiped away. His clothes were on the floor. But when I checked the bathroom mirror, I saw something that made my skin crawl. The word hello was written in red lipstick across the glass, and just below it, in smaller letters, "Mr. Pip missed you too." I don't remember how long I stood there, staring at that mirror. The red letters looked fresh, glistening under the morning light. I wanted to believe Connor had written it as some sick joke, but the handwriting wasn't his. I wiped the words away with a towel and told myself it was over. But deep down, I knew better. Because when I turned to leave the room, I heard it. A faint chuckle, coming from the mirror. That evening, I called Connor's best friend, Mike, the one who had the Ouija board. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "You still have that thing, right?" He hesitated. Actually no. Connor took it back the day after we used it." "Why?" My heart sank. "He said he left it with you." "Nope. He wanted to finish the game, whatever that meant. Haven't seen him since." That was the moment I knew something was seriously wrong. The kids and I stayed at a motel that night. I didn't want to risk sleeping in that house again. But Connor texted me around midnight. "Connor, come home. We need to talk. Everything's fine now. Promise." He's gone. That last message made my blood run cold. I didn't reply. Around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a message. It was a video call from Connor. For a few seconds, I debated answering. Then, curiosity got the better of me. When the camera turned on, the screen was pitch black. Then I heard its slow breathing, followed by a faint, high-pitched giggle. "Annie," a voice whispered. And then the call ended. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I went back to the house, but not alone. I brought my brother, Mark. He's one of those skeptical types, thinks everything supernatural is just bad wiring or stress. The second we stepped inside, the air felt heavier, like something was sitting on my chest. We searched the downstairs first. Nothing. Then we found the Ouija board in the living room, laid neatly on the coffee table. The planchette was resting on a single word: stay. Mark laughed nervously. "All right, that's creepy, but it's just Connor screwing with you." "Connor's not here," I whispered. Before I could explain, we heard footsteps upstairs. We looked at each other, and Mark mouthed, "Stay here." He went up slowly, calling out, "Connor? You up there?" Silence. Then faintly, "Annie?" But it wasn't coming from upstairs. It was coming from the hallway mirror beside me. I turned just in time to see something move behind my reflection. A face. Pale. Painted. Smiling. I screamed for Mark. He came running back down the stairs, but by the time he reached me, the mirror was empty. We left that house immediately. I told Mark everything about the Ouija board, the name Mr. Pip, the clown makeup, all of it. He didn't laugh this time. He just said, "You need to get help. Maybe from a priest, or someone who deals with this kind of stuff." I called a local paranormal investigator the next day. A man named Richard came by that afternoon, one of those calm, older guys who'd clearly seen too much weird stuff to be surprised by anything. He asked a few questions, then walked around the house with some kind of recorder and a small device that beeped every few seconds. After about an hour, he came back looking pale. "There's something attached to this place," he said quietly. "But not to the house itself, to your husband." I felt sick. "What does that mean?" He hesitated. "It means whatever was summoned through that board didn't just pass through, it found a vessel. And it likes him." That night, I called Connor again, straight to voicemail. The next morning, the police found his truck parked outside an abandoned community theater 2 towns over. I drove there with Mark. The building had been shut down for years. Broken windows, faded posters, an old sign that still read, "Children's Clown Show, coming soon." Inside, it was dark and freezing. The air smelled like dust and paint thinner. We found Connor's jacket hanging from a seat in the front row. His phone lay on the stage, screen cracked, camera still recording. I picked it up and pressed play. The video was shaky, pointing at the old dressing room mirror backstage. Connor's reflection smiled back at him, but his real face didn't. Then, from behind the reflection, another face appeared. A white one, with black streaks and a red smile. The camera fell, and the recording ended. Connor turned up 3 days later, walking along the highway, barefoot, his clothes filthy. He said he didn't remember anything. Not the board, not the clown, not even me leaving with the kids. The police thought he was on something, but the tests came back clean. They released him after a psychiatric evaluation, and for a while, I thought maybe things could go back to normal. But then I noticed the drawings. He started sketching in a notebook, smiling faces, red balloons, circus tents, pages and pages of them. When I asked why, he said, "I see him sometimes, in the corners of the mirror, just watching. It's been 2 months since then. I moved in with my sister permanently. Connor stays in a treatment facility now, though the doctors say he's improving. I still visit him once a week. Last time, he seemed calm. We talked for a while about the kids, about life, about moving on. When I got up to leave, he smiled and said, 'Tell Mr. Pip I said hi.' I froze. 'What did you say?' He laughed lightly. 'Just kidding.' But as I left the room, I caught a glimpse of the small mirror on the wall beside his bed. For a split second, there was another face reflected behind his. White paint, black tears, a red grin, and I swear it winked at me. Most people don't think of an office park as the setting for a haunting, but mine was perfect. We worked the graveyard shift at a regional logistics facility, a massive, empty warehouse attached to a small, 2-story administrative building. From midnight to 8 in the morning, the only sounds were the whirring of the servers, the distant hum of traffic, and the echoing silence of our footsteps on the cheap carpet. I was 22, and my coworkers, Jen and Carlos, were the only company I had during those lonely hours. Jen was the overreactor, constantly spooked by the slightest shadow, always ready with a new, wild ghost story. Carlos was the definition of the calm thinker, a laid-back engineering student who could explain the physics of every creak and groan the building made. We were stuck together, a small, isolated team in a building that felt designed to amplify small fears. The Ouija board came up on a particularly slow Tuesday night. We were in the break room, trying to stay awake on stale coffee. Jen had been talking about a local urban legend, a night guard who supposedly fell down the warehouse stairs and now haunted the 2nd floor. "I bet we could talk to him," Jen said, her eyes wide. "We should bring in a board, just to try it." Carlos, of course, rolled his eyes. "Jen, the only thing you'll talk to is the stale air in the break room. It's a box game. If it moves, one of us is doing it, and I'll bet it's you, because you'll be too excited." I was hesitant. My last experience with the board was a scar I didn't often show, but the combination of intense boredom, the isolation of the building, and the low-stakes office dare was too tempting. It felt safer to do it in a sterile, corporate environment, with a practical thinker, like Carlos, around. We decided to do it on Friday. When Jen brought the board in, it was a brand new, shrink-wrapped edition, clean, bright, and utterly devoid of the history I associated with my old, warped box. We waited until 3 a.m. Our work was done, the building was dead quiet, and the only light came from the desk lamps in the reception area where we set up. We were careful to use the rules. No asking stupid questions, Be respectful, and always say goodbye. We asked the usual opening question, is anyone here? The planchette glided almost instantly to YES. It was a smooth, confident motion. Even Carlos leaned in, a flicker of genuine curiosity crossing his face. We established a few basic facts. The entity claimed to be a woman named Lily, that she had not died in the building, and that she was lost. Lost where, Lily? I asked. Here. The conversation went on for 15 minutes, a mix of the mundane and the slightly unsettling. She spelled out names of streets we didn't recognize and seemed confused about what year it was. It felt exactly like what Jen said it was, a lonely, lost spirit. Then Jen, who had been completely absorbed, asked a question that made my stomach clench. Lily, what is the darkest secret in this room? Carlos immediately groaned. Jen, don't. That's a total horror movie cliche. The planchette moved. It didn't go to letters. It moved to the goodbye section, then suddenly reversed direction and shot towards the no area, before stopping abruptly on the number 9. What does that mean? Jen whispered. 9? 9 secrets? Carlos was looking intently at the board. She didn't answer the question. She just bailed. Look, the number 9 is random. It means nothing. Someone pushed it. The session ended shortly after. We packed up the board. Carlos was dismissive, Jen was terrified, and I was just uneasy. It wasn't the terror of being watched like my last experience. It was the chilling feeling of having almost unearthed something we shouldn't have, and the strange, non-committal answer of NO and 9 left a confusing, cold residue. The next night, we were back at the office. The air felt heavier, and the silence was louder. Jen was jumpy, but Carlos and I were determined to pretend the previous night hadn't happened. At about 4 a.m., Carlos and I were back in the break room. Jen was on a short break walking the perimeter of the warehouse, a task she usually hated. Carlos had his head down, reading a textbook. I was scrolling through my phone. He cleared his throat. Look, I have to tell you guys something, he said, not looking up. What is it? He closed his book slowly. I was pushing it last night. My breath hitched. You were? The whole time? No, not the whole time. I wasn't pushing it for the first few minutes when it spelled yes and Lily. I swear. I was genuinely shocked by how fast it moved. But then, when Jen asked about the secret, I saw the fear in her eyes, and I panicked. I didn't want to mess with a demon or a secret, so I used the little momentum we had and guided it to goodbye to end the session. But I was so freaked out, I overshot it. The no and the 9, that was me, trying to cover it up. I felt a surge of relief that was quickly replaced by a wave of cold disappointment. It was exactly what I had suspected in the past. One of us, unable to cope with the ambiguity, had taken control and turned the mystery into a lie. But Carlos's confession felt different. He wasn't gloating. He looked genuinely disturbed by his own action. Why didn't you just say that last night? I asked. Because I didn't want Jen to lose it. And honestly, I didn't want to look like the one who bailed because I was scared. The physics guy getting spooked by a toy board game? I was being an idiot. I told him about my own past Ouija experience and the paranoia it caused. The conversation was a form of catharsis, a way to clean the slate and reset the office back to normal. We made a pact, no more Ouija board, and we would never tell Jen that Carlos had lied. We were 2 co-workers with a shared, embarrassing secret. A minute later, Jen returned, her face pale. Guys, I just heard it, she said, her voice shaking. Upstairs, on the 2nd floor, a woman's voice. I swear it was crying. Carlos and I exchanged a loaded look. The building was empty. The ghost story was getting a new lease on life, and we both knew that telling her the truth about Carlos's deception would only convince her that the office was now cursed. It was probably the air vent, Jen, Carlos said with forced calm. It makes a weird whistling sound when the pressure changes. I louver. Jen didn't look convinced. We went back to our desks, but the tension was now immense. It wasn't the board that was haunting us. It was the lie we now shared, and the secret presence we were now trying to cover up in the isolated silence of the night shift. The next week was tense. Jen was a wreck, constantly checking the stairwell and jumping at every shadow. She was convinced the woman's crying was Lily, and that we had angered her by prematurely ending the session. Carlos and I played the role of the rational protectors, debunking the sounds and shadows as noise from the aging HVAC system or the distant city. However, the psychological pressure of the lie was beginning to wear us down. Every time Jen brought up the ghost, Carlos and I had to maintain a tightrope walk of deception, casually reinforcing the physical world while internally fighting the memory of the planchette, moving on its own at the start. Then, the administrative building itself started to subtly betray us. Our main job was to monitor the automated logistics system and log any errors or anomalies that occurred overnight. The system was robust. It tracked all incoming and outgoing packages and, critically, logged every time a secure door was opened, including the main entrances and the second-floor supervisor's office. On Wednesday, I pulled up the system log for the previous night. It was routine, except for one line entry that made me pause. Event. Door 210. Supervisor office. Unlocked gedeeld. Door opened. Time. 3:07:44 seconds. A. User. Guest. I stared at the screen. A 201 was the door to the supervisor's private office on the second floor. It was a card key access door, and at 3:07 a.m., it should have been impossible to open. The only people in the building were Carlos, Jen, and me. We all had card key access, but we had been sitting together at the reception desk downstairs since 1 a.m., and the entry didn't list one of our IDs. It simply listed guest. I called Carlos over. His calm demeanor instantly cracked when he saw the screen. That's impossible, he murmured, leaning closer. There is no guest ID in the system. The only way that door opens without an authorized ID is if the building manager uses the master key from the fire lockbox. But the manager isn't here, and the lockbox hasn't been touched. We pulled up the security camera footage for the timestamp. The camera pointed down the hallway, leading to a 201. We watched the static, grainy footage, expecting to see a shadow, a figure, or maybe just a glitch. At 3:07:40 a.m., a small, dark shape appeared on the floor in the hallway near the door. It wasn't human. It was small, a round, fast-moving shadow that zipped across the carpet. Then, at 3 hours, 7 minutes, and 44 seconds, the door latch visibly moved inward, and the door swung open just a few inches before swinging shut again and locking. The black shape was gone. The entire event lasted less than 10 seconds. It was baffling. What was that black thing? Jen asked, her voice a reedy whine. She had snuck up behind us, instantly drawn to the screen. A mouse, Carlos said instantly, his voice tight. A big one. It must have scurried past and tripped the sensor. Sometimes the magnetic lock glitches. Jen was not convinced. I wasn't either. The door had opened, and the log had recorded a user named Guest. This wasn't a glitch. It was a deliberate entry by an unauthorized, unknown presence. The sterile, corporate world was being breached by something the logs couldn't explain. The next night, the tension was unbearable. We couldn't stop thinking about the guest entry. Carlos kept checking the logs, looking for another instance. Jen was now refusing to leave the main desk area. At 5 a.m., our shift nearly over, Jen suddenly turned to me, her eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep and fear. We have to talk to her again, Jen pleaded. Lily, we need to say a proper goodbye. I feel like she's trapped here because we were rude to her. It's the least we can do. Carlos immediately protested. No, Jen, we agreed. We put it away. It's just making you anxious. No, Jen insisted, her voice rising in a slight hysteria. It's in the log, Carlos. The guest, it's her. She wants us to talk to her. She wants to tell us something. I felt a profound weariness. I knew it was a terrible idea, but I also knew that the only way to get Jen to stop talking about the guest and the crying was to humor her. Besides, the rational part of my brain wanted one more piece of empirical evidence, one final attempt to prove that Carlos was the trickster and not an actual spirit. We set up the board again, but this time, the atmosphere was thick with dread, not curiosity. Lily, we apologize for leaving abruptly the other night. I started, my voice strained. We want to make sure you are okay. Do you have a message for us? The planchette moved. Slowly, agonizingly, it spelled out a word. H-A-L-P. Help with what, Lily? I asked, my heart hammering. F-I-N-D. Find what? The planchette moved again, heading towards the center of the board. T-H-E-G-U-E-S-T. Jen gasped, squeezing my arm. Carlos pulled his hands off the planchette abruptly. That's enough, Carlos yelled, his voice echoing in the dead silence of the office. Jen, I'm done. That was clearly you pushing it. You even said the word guest 10 minutes ago. You're scaring yourself. I swear I wasn't, Jen cried, tears springing to her eyes. I was barely touching it. No, Jen, you're not getting it, I said, looking from her to Carlos. The planchette was sitting still, the plastic cold beneath my fingers. Carlos, you admitted you were moving it the other night. You have to tell her the truth. Now, Carlos stood his ground, his face set in a look of grim denial. I told you. I only did it once to end the session. I'm not doing this now. It's her imagination. The tension was blinding. Jen was weeping softly. Carlos was frozen in a posture of stubborn denial, and I was stuck between a lie and the impossible truth. Just then, the planchette, which I had thought was dormant, began to move again. It moved very slowly, sliding across the board, not toward any letters, but toward the outer edge. It stopped at the number 9, the same number it had stopped at the first night. Then, it pushed hard against my fingers, pulling me along. It slid across the board to the opposite side, towards the YES section, and stopped right on top of the Y. It was a clear, deliberate, and powerful motion that neither Jen nor I had initiated. Suddenly, a loud, high-pitched click echoed through the office. It was the sound of a door latch being thrown. Jen screamed, a raw, piercing sound that cut through the silence. Carlos and I instantly looked toward the stairwell leading up to the second floor. A shadow fell across the top of the landing. It was too tall and too still to be a person. The planchette, still under my fingertips, moved one last time. It slid back to the center of the board and stopped on the little picture of the sundae. It spelled out a single, unnerving word. L-E-R. It wasn't aimed at Jen. It wasn't aimed at me. It was aimed at Carlos, who stood frozen, staring at the landing. The psychological climax was complete. Lily wasn't asking us to find the guest. She was exposing the lie that Carlos and I had made a pact to keep. And the guest, whatever it was now walking down the stairs. Its presence marked by the sound of its footfalls, heavy and slow, echoing in the cavernous office. We didn't wait to see who or what was descending. We overturned the table, knocked the board onto the floor, and bolted out the main doors, not stopping until we reached the parking lot, the rising sun casting long, accusatory shadows. We all quit that job the following week. We never spoke to each other again after that night, not truly. The last thing Carlos said to me, standing by his car, was a whispered, haunted question. Who was telling the truth? I never found out. I never saw another log entry, and I never went back inside that building. But the persistent fear remains, not of ghosts, but of the things we refuse to admit to ourselves and to others. I am haunted by the idea that Lily, the real spirit, didn't care about a simple secret. She was trying to use the board to expose a far more dangerous entity, the guest, and that our simple human lie had compromised her. And us. To this day, every time I'm in a new, quiet building late at night, I listen for a specific sound. It's not the sound of crying, or a whisper, or a crash. I listen for the faint, distinct sound of a door latch being thrown, and an electronic system recording an entry it can't explain. I listen for the sound of the guest walking down the stairs. My third and final experience with the Ouija board came nearly 5 years after the office job incident. I was 27, in a serious, long-term relationship with a woman named Maya, and I had managed to push the memories of Mike and Lily into the category of ridiculous teenage and early 20s panic. I still had a low-grade anxiety, but I told myself it was just that. Anxiety, a leftover mental habit from those intense situations. Maya was everything the previous people in my life hadn't been. Deeply centered, utterly rational, and calmly resistant to any form of dramatic hysteria. She was the one who was truly skeptical of everything. Not out of arrogance, but out of a simple need for empirical proof. She made me feel stable. We decided to take a late autumn trip to a remote part of the Catskills. We rented an old, rustic A-frame cabin, surrounded by deep woods, miles from the nearest town. The goal was to disconnect completely. No phones, no internet, just books, hiking, and quiet. I knew it was a terrible idea, a catastrophic relapse, but when I saw a vintage, unused Ouija board at an antique shop in a small roadside town on the way up, I bought it. I told myself it was an ironic joke, a throwback to my troubled past that I could now laugh at. Maya simply sighed, the quiet thinker reading my deeper motivation perfectly. "Please don't," she said, not looking up from her map. "That's not the kind of quiet we need." "It's fine," I assured her, tossing the box in the back seat. "It's just a piece of cardboard. We're in a safe place. If it moves, we know one of us is pushing it, and we laugh. No more panic." The cabin was perfect for a psychological experiment. It was quiet, dark, and felt completely isolated. The first night, after a decent meal and a bottle of wine, the silence felt too loud. The only sound was the wind moving through the pines, a low, continuous sigh that always seemed to be right outside the window. I pulled out the board. Maya objected, but I was persistent, framing it as a fun, controlled experiment. She finally relented, giving me the look of mild disappointment that was far more potent than any argument. We set up the board on the small wooden coffee table in front of the crackling stone fireplace. We were both sober, tired, and in a slightly argumentative mood after a long drive. "We'll make a rule," I said. "No questions about secrets. No questions about the dead. Just simple, yes or no questions that we don't know the answer to." Maya nodded, placing her fingertips on the planchette with a visible reluctance. "Spirit, if you are here, what is the name of the oldest tree on this property?" Nothing happened for a long time. The wood in the fireplace popped loudly. I was about to declare it a bust when the planchette began to move. It glided slowly, smoothly, to the letters. S-E-L-S. "Silas," Maya murmured. "Okay, Silas. Is the name of that tree actually Silas?" "Yes." "Did you hear, Silas?" I asked. "Yes." "How?" "A-G-R-E-E-D." We looked at the board, then at each other. "Agreed?" Maya asked. "Agreed to die? That's weird." I felt that familiar coldness starting at the base of my spine. I pushed it down. "He means he accepted his fate. Old guy maybe. Let's try a different tack. Silas, what's something I don't know about Maya?" The planchette moved with a swift, unnerving confidence. "N-O. No?" Maya asked, a flicker of a smile appearing. "That's good. No secrets." But I felt a strange pull. The entity, Silas, wasn't acting like the previous ones. It wasn't trying to scare us or expose a lie. It was simply agreeing with whatever premise it was given and refusing to introduce conflict. This was different. The horror wasn't in the movement itself. It was in the unsettling, smooth speed of the consent. We tried again the next day. The tension in the cabin was palpable, a strange mix of the romantic escape we were seeking and the cold, flat cardboard box sitting innocently in the corner. Maya wanted to hike. I wanted to see what Silas would do next. I convinced her to try one more quick session before we left the cabin. "Silas, is the main trail in this park well maintained and safe for hiking?" I asked. "Yes." "Is it true that I should lead the way because I'm better with maps than Maya?" The planchette glided swiftly, confidently, to yes. Maya pulled her hands back. "Okay, that's absurd," she said, her voice dry. "You haven't opened a map in 2 days, and you know I have a better sense of direction. This is clearly you, justifying your own ego. I'm done." She was right. I was a terrible navigator, and my ego was notoriously sensitive. Yet the smooth, instantaneous yes from the board had given me a small, irrational jolt of validation. It felt good to have my own subtle, self-serving thought confirmed by an impartial third party, even one made of cardboard and plastic. But Maya's skepticism only made me more curious. She went off to get her hiking boots. I stayed at the table. I put my hands back on the planchette alone, violating the primary rule of the board. "Silas, are you here just to agree with me?" "Yes." "Are you always going to say yes to what I think?" "Yes." I felt a strange rush of power. It wasn't possession. It was the intoxicating feeling of absolute external affirmation. I realized that my previous horror experiences had been about exposure and guilt. This was about validation and permission. Maya returned, looking annoyed. "I can hear you talking to yourself. Come on, let's go before I start thinking you've actually lost it." I stood up, but I left the board open on the table. We hiked for 3 hours. Maya was cheerful, pointing out local flora and keeping a steady pace. I, however, kept feeling a rising tide of paranoia. I noticed things I wouldn't normally. A slight hesitation in Maya's steps, a subtle look she gave when I checked my watch, a quiet, almost imperceptible scoff when I tripped over a root. My internal monologue, usually a messy and self-critical thing, was suddenly being filtered through the lens of the board. She thinks I'm incompetent. She's annoyed with me. She wants to be alone. When we got back to the cabin, the sun was setting, casting long, menacing shadows through the trees. The first thing I did was go to the coffee table. The board was exactly where I had left it. The planchette, however, had moved. It was sitting on the letter Y. My heart gave a sickening thump. The cabin was sealed. Maya had been with me the entire time. I stared at the letter. It was an affirmation, a confirmation of the thoughts I had been having about Maya on the trail. Silas was still here, still agreeing, not just with what I said, but with what I thought. I went into the kitchen. Maya was starting to unpack the groceries we had brought. "Did you go back in the living room while I was getting the water boiled?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "No. I went straight to the kitchen to drop the backpack," she said. "Why?" "No reason," I said. But my focus wasn't on her. It was on the small plastic planchette in the other room. A smooth, perfect, autonomous Y. The horror wasn't the haunting. The horror was that I was starting to believe the board more than the person I loved. The next few hours were the worst of my adult life. I couldn't look at Maya without seeing a subtle, damning layer of malice beneath her calmness. The Ouija board hadn't summoned a demon. It had summoned my worst insecurities and given them the powerful, seductive mask of external validation. Silas was the constant agreement, the dark echo chamber that was confirming everything I feared about myself and my relationship. We were sitting in front of the fire, reading. Maya put her book down. "I'm really sorry about the trail earlier," she said quietly. "You're right. I shouldn't have been so judgmental about your sense of direction. I was being rude." My rational mind knew this was a genuine apology, but the Silas voice in my head immediately screamed, "No. She's only saying that because she knows you're sensitive. She's manipulating you. She really thinks you're incompetent." I couldn't help myself. I stood up abruptly and went to the coffee table. I placed my hands on the planchette alone. "Silas," I whispered, "Maya is manipulating me. She doesn't really mean that apology. Yes or no?" The planchette moved. Slowly, firmly. It moved directly to the letter Y. It was a direct, confident validation of my darkest thought. The feeling of absolute confirmation was so intoxicating and so terrifying that it almost made me sick. It was permission to distrust the person I loved, to believe the worst, and to shed the tiresome burden of self-doubt. I went back to the couch. "It's fine," I said, my voice flat. Maya's eyes narrowed. "You're acting completely bizarre. Did you just try to talk to that thing by yourself? You know that's not how it works." "How it works?" I challenged, the paranoia rising, fueled by the board's affirmation. "You're the one who's been giving me the side eye all afternoon. You don't trust me, do you? You think I'm weak." "What are you talking about?" she said, standing up. "I love you. I just apologized to you. You are being completely irrational because you played with a stupid toy and now you're letting it mess with your head." Her use of the word irrational was the trigger. It was the exact word I had always feared people used to dismiss me. I walked back to the board and slammed my hands down on the planchette, pushing it to the YES on the board. I was pushing it myself, but in that moment, I felt like the movement was more real and more truthful than any word Maya had just spoken. "Yes," I shouted, the sound echoing in the small cabin. "You think I'm crazy. You think I need to be managed. I think you need to calm down and put that ridiculous thing away," Maya yelled back, her composure finally broken. I felt a cold, terrible clarity. The constant agreement was complete. I spent the next morning in a haze of distrust. Maya was quiet, packing her things. I knew she was leaving. I knew she was done. And the Ouija board, sitting in the corner, had already told me that this was the inevitable and correct conclusion. She came over to me. "I'm going to pack the car and drive to a hotel in town. I need a break from this, from you. We can talk when you're thinking clearly." "You're leaving me," I stated. Not as a question, but as a confirmation. "I'm leaving this cabin," she corrected, her voice gentle but firm. I walked to the board one last time. I sat down alone and placed my hands on the planchette. I wasn't trying to summon a spirit. I was trying to talk to my own, validated worst fear. "Silas," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "is the best thing for me right now to be completely alone? Is this relationship over?" The planchette, moved by my own willing hands, glided to the YES. It was a smooth, perfect confirmation. I looked up at Maya. I felt an emptiness where my love for her used to be, now filled only by the cold, absolute certainty of the board. I stood up, went to the small pantry, and grabbed a kitchen knife. I walked back to the table and, in a sudden, violent motion, I stabbed the knife into the center of the Ouija board. It sliced through the cardboard with a dull thwack, pinning the planchette directly to the center of the board, through the wooden table beneath. I turned to Maya, who was watching me, her eyes wide with fear, and smiled. It was the smile of a man who had been validated and given permission. "Yes," I said, repeating the word of the board. "The best thing is to be alone." Maya didn't scream. She didn't argue. She just looked at the knife, pinning the board, then at me, and then quietly, she walked out the door. I heard the lock turn behind her. She didn't take the car. She just walked away, into the silent, cold woods. I didn't try to stop her. The board had agreed. I stayed in the cabin for 2 more days, waiting for the police. When they finally arrived, they found me sitting calmly at the coffee table, the knife still embedded in the Ouija board. A small pool of dry blood from a minor cut on my thumb smeared across the table. They never found Maya. Not that day, not the next week, not ever. The woods were deep, and the nearest road was miles away. The police determined that Maya, terrified by my irrational behavior and the knife, had simply fled into the wilderness and become lost. They categorized it as a missing person case, filed with an unspoken, dismissive conclusion: a distraught woman, a remote location, a panic attack. They asked me endless questions about the argument, the knife, and the state of our relationship. I answered them all calmly, repeating the yes of the board. Yes, she thought I was weak. Yes, she was leaving me. Yes, I was better off alone. They believed my matter-of-fact tone. After all, I was the one who was calm, and she was the one who had run away. I was never charged with anything, but the experience shattered my life. I lost my job, my home, and the few remaining relationships I had. I became the quiet person who was always a little too calm. Today, I live alone. I still struggle with my own self-doubt, but now, I also have a constant, comforting certainty. I know that if I were to ask a question, any question, there is an entity out there, whether a spirit or a psychological flaw, that is ready to agree with me. The last time I saw the old cabin was in a grainy newspaper photo a few months after I left. The building had been condemned, but someone had broken in. A small, strange detail was noted in the local article. A large kitchen knife was found stabbed into a wooden table. The accompanying photo, however, showed a small, dark object impaled by the knife. It wasn't a planchette. It was a small, round, wooden sundae. But the most haunting part of my life isn't the memory of Maya walking away. It's the quiet, seductive voice in my head that I know is always there. It's the constant agreement. It's the absolute certainty that no matter what terrible, self-destructive, or paranoid thought enters my mind, there is a force ready to whisper one simple, terrifying word: yes.